The early 1900s felt like a room filled with gasoline, just waiting for a match. We call the causes main: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Everyone was building huge armies, making secret deals to protect each other, stealing land, and puffing out their chests with national pride. The match that lit the fire happened in Sarajevo. A Serbian nationalist shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Because of those secret alliances, a local conflict exploded. Within weeks, the whole world was at war. It was like a row of dominoes falling, one after another. To understand how the world broke apart, we have to look at the main causes. First, militarism. Nations were aggressively arming themselves. Second, alliances. Rigid agreements meant if one country fought, everyone fought. Third, imperialism, competition for global empires. And fourth, nationalism, an intense pride that created deep tensions. Europe was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. That spark came in June 1914 in Sarajevo, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This single event triggered the alliance systems, and within weeks, the entire continent was at war. Both sides expected a quick victory. Instead, they got a stalemate on the Western Front. The war bogged down into a brutal system of trenches stretching across France and Belgium. This wasn't the glorious warfare of the past. Soldiers lived in cramped, disease-ridden mud holes. Between the opposing lines lay no man's land, a deadly open space where soldiers faced machine gun fire and artillery in suicidal charges that often gained only mere meters of ground. It was a war of attrition. The reason for this stalemate was technology. This was the first instance of industrialized slaughter. Commanders were using 19th century tactics against 20th century weapons. Machine guns, heavy artillery, and poison gases like mustard and chlorine turned battlefields into absolute killing zones where thousands could die in a single day. We also saw the introduction of tanks and aeroplanes. While these mechanized units revolutionized combat, early models were unreliable, and their full terrifying potential wouldn't be realized until the next major war. While Europe burned, the United States initially remained neutral. President Wilson promoted peace, though the U.S. was profiting by trading with both sides. However, three things shifted American isolationism. First, the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 by a German U-boat killed over 1,000 people, including 128 Americans, turning public opinion against Germany. Then came the Zimmermann telegram in 1917. British intelligence intercepted a German proposal to Mexico, promising to help them reclaim Texas and Arizona if they attacked the U.S. This was the final straw. Congress declared war in April 1917, bringing fresh troops to the exhausted Allied forces. This wasn't just a war for soldiers. It was total war. Entire economies shifted to war production. Governments rationed food and supplies, while propaganda campaigns urged civilians to sacrifice for victory. This period also sparked a massive social change. With millions of men fighting overseas, women stepped into the workforce in unprecedented numbers. They filled factory jobs, drove ambulances, and kept industries running, forever changing gender roles in society. The war ended in 1918, but the peace treaty signed in 1919 actually set the stage for the next conflict. The Treaty of Versailles included a war guilt clause, forcing Germany to accept full responsibility for starting the war. This created deep resentment among Germans. Even worse were the crushing reparations. Germany was forced to pay 132 billion gold marks. This debt devastated their economy and destabilized the new Weimar Republic. The victors wanted punishment, but they created desperation. That desperation grew worse during the interwar years. In October 1929, the Wall Street stock market crashed, wiping out fortunes overnight and triggering a global economic catastrophe. Unemployment in America soared to 25%. In Germany, the economic situation was even more surreal due to hyperinflation. Money became so worthless that people needed wheelbarrows of cash just to buy bread. In these starving, desperate nations, populations began turning to extremist leaders who promised radical solutions. Out of the economic ashes, totalitarian regimes emerged. In Italy, Benito Mussolini seized power in 1922, establishing fascism based on extreme nationalism and military expansion. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin ruled through terror, secret police, and mass purges that killed millions. And in Germany, Adolf Hitler became chancellor in 1933. He promised to restore German pride, overturn the humiliation of Versailles, and create a racially pure empire through conquest. Hitler didn't hide his ambitions. He violated the Treaty of Versailles by rebuilding the military and reoccupying the Rhineland. Britain and France, desperate to avoid another war, did nothing. Hitler then absorbed Austria and demanded the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. In what is now known as the Munich Conference, Britain and France agreed to his demands. They believed in appeasement, giving a bully what he wants to keep the peace, but it only emboldened Nazi aggression. Appeasement failed. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. They used a new tactic called blitzkrieg or lightning war, using fast-moving tanks and aircraft to overwhelm defenders. The results were terrifyingly effective. The German war machine conquered France in just 6 weeks in 1940. Britain was left standing alone. During the Battle of Britain, Hitler's Luftwaffe bombed London relentlessly, but the Royal Air Force held firm in the skies, preventing a German invasion. As the war raged, the Nazi regime implemented their darkest policy, the final solution. This was systematic genocide. They built concentration and extermination camps to industrialize murder. They targeted Jews, Roma, disabled people, LGBTQ+ individuals, and political dissidents. The Holocaust claimed 6 million Jewish lives and millions of others. It remains history's most horrific demonstration of hatred and the ultimate danger of unchecked authoritarianism. While Europe fought, conflict was also brewing in the Pacific. Japan was expanding, invading China and Southeast Asia to secure resources like oil and rubber. On December 7, 1941, a day of infamy, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It killed over 2,400 Americans and destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet. The United States declared war on Japan the next day. Germany and Italy then declared war on America, turning this into a truly global conflict. By 1942, the tide began to turn. Germany made a fatal error, a two-front war. To the east, they fought the Soviet Union. At Stalingrad, the Red Army destroyed an entire German army in a brutal battle that marked the beginning of Nazi Germany's decline. To the west, the Allies launched D-Day on June 6, 1944. It was the largest amphibious invasion in history, storming the beaches of Normandy to liberate Western Europe. Germany was now being squeezed from both sides. In the Pacific, the war was different but equally brutal. American forces used a strategy called island hopping. They captured strategic islands one by one, bypassing heavily fortified positions to get closer to Japan. Battles like Midway, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa were ferocious. The Japanese soldiers refused to surrender, often resorting to suicidal kamikaze attacks. It was a slow, bloody push toward the Japanese mainland. Back in the U.S., the country became the arsenal of democracy. American industry produced an astounding amount of ships, tanks, and planes that supplied Allied forces worldwide. However, the home front had a dark side. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated to internment camps. They lost their homes and businesses in a shameful violation of civil rights driven by wartime fear and racism. By the spring of 1945, the Nazi regime was collapsing. As Allied troops advanced, they liberated the concentration camps, revealing the full horror of the Holocaust to a shocked world. Soviet forces captured Berlin after brutal street fighting. Hitler committed suicide in his bunker. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. This was VE Day, victory in Europe. A war in Europe was over, but Japan fought on. The US had developed a secret weapon through the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. Facing the prospect of a costly invasion of Japan, the US dropped 2 atomic bombs, the first on Hiroshima on August 6th, and the second on Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. The cities were obliterated, and over 200,000 people died. Japan announced its surrender on August 15th, ending World War II, but sparking a debate about atomic warfare that continues today. After the smoke cleared, the world needed to ensure this would never happen again. The League of Nations had failed, so in 1945 the United Nations was created. Its goal was to maintain peace through diplomacy. A key feature was the Security Council, which gave veto power to the 5 major victors: the US, USSR, UK, France, and China. The focus shifted to collective security and human rights. However, true peace was elusive. The world's 2 new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, immediately entered a rivalry. It was an ideological struggle between capitalism and communism. Winston Churchill famously declared that an iron curtain had descended across the continent, dividing the democratic West from the Soviet-controlled East. World War II had ended, but the Cold War had just begun. Thank you for listening.